viewers and our listeners at home, you might have heard about this book. There's been several kind of viral interviews with the author. The book's called In Defense of Looting, and it's kind of what it sounds like. It's somebody writing a book-length defense of not only looting, but rioting and tactics, and basically arguing that this is good for society, it's resisting racism, resisting capitalism, so on and so forth. I think a few of the interviews that have gone viral with the author, like on NPR, there's been one in The New Yorker, I think some in The Nation, have demonstrated that this author is making arguments that I think many people find kind of hard to believe. They're kind of stretching the bounds of what people would kind of consider to be acceptable to be elevated to a place like National Public Radio or any of these esteemed publications. So what I did is I went through a copy of the book, and basically I picked out a few passages, a few sentences, and I took real passages and sentences, and I took ones that I just made up on the spot, and we decided that we're going to play a game on today's show. I'm going to read 10 passages or sentences. Some of them are from the book, some of them are ones that I just made up. And Leighton and Shunt are going to guess whether these were real, they were really found in this book, or whether the ones that I just authored as satire. So if you're at home, pull out a sheet of paper or keep notes and play along with us. I think it'll be a fun time. Are you guys ready? All right, so we're going to have 10 phrases, sentences, or passages from the book. So let's start with number 1. Just as Jews were in 1965, Koreans in 1992 were on the front line of the confrontation between capital and the residents of central LA, the face of capital for these communities. So what do you guys think? Was that real or was that satirical?
Okay, I actually happened. I came across this. Well, I just gave it away. I came across this one.
I did too. I did too, actually. So I think it's okay for us to just call this one a tie.
This is actually a real passage from the book where the author Vicky Osterwell argues that looting that was targeting Jewish communities in the 1960s, or looting that was targeting Korean communities in Los Angeles during those riots, was justified because these were the people who had the money. They were the faces of capitalism. So this almost anti-Semitic and racist targeting and violence and theft and arson was in fact justified. Real argument from this book. But let's move on to the second one. Hopefully this will be a little bit more of a toss-up. So looting symbolizes a rebellion against the cis patriarchy. It is a Molotov cocktail in the face of our heteronormative white supremacist society. So what do you guys think? Was that actually in the book, or was that something satirical?
Real.
I say satirical just because I think there are so many of the classic buzzwords in there that I feel like it's got to be... It's close, though. It's very close.
For that exact same reason, I think it's real.
Okay, so this is really interesting. This one actually I made this one up. This is real.
Oh,
so
really?
that one goes to Shunt. Shunt is ahead. Just tiebreaker right there.
Just like one too many critical theory buzzwords. If you left one out, I would have been like, it's real. But like it just that.
Wait, can you read it again just for my...
Looting symbolizes a rebellion against the cis patriarchy. It is a Molotov cocktail in the face of our heteronormative white supremacist society.
I gotta say, well done.
I can see it's just like a tiny bit too overwritten, because the passages that I read from this book, she's actually not a terrible writer. I mean, she is a terrible writer in the sense that she's like an academic and is just relying on all these obnoxious buzzwords. But she's got some command of the craft of writing.
Sure.
So I had
the same takeaway. I felt like it was fairly, in terms of the language, the syntax, the format. Vicky, you're not a bad writer, actually. I think, and that's why when I wrote fiction about your book, I felt like we were kind of in sync here. Like, we were both entertaining. We both had, Anyway, let's move on to number 3. So far we have Shant in the lead. Number 3, the destruction and loss of every black life in that riot must be mourned and avenged. In parentheses, I count every white rioter killed a victory.
Whoa. Okay, read again. Give me one more.
Okay, one more time. The destruction and loss of every black life in that riot must be both mourned and avenged. I count every white rioter killed a victory.
That's got to be. I mean, that's me really not wanting to believe in a world that could include that kind of statement. Although, I mean, Yeah, no, I'm going to say that's not good.
That one is so shocking that she said every white rioter is a victory, or every white...
Count every white rioter killed a victory.
Okay, so I think it's fake for two reasons. One of them is that I think that that's the one that would have been going viral, and I would have read it if it was real. And the second one is because any rioter who's killed is not a triumph, right? If it was a white officer, then I could believe it.
So you guys are actually both wrong. That was a real passage from the book.
Shut the fuck up.
It actually,
serious?
Well, it's interesting. So this relates to the Tulsa riots. She was writing about the Tulsa race riots in 1921, which is part of, I think, the context of it.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to the idea that white race rioters
part of this
dying is not a
part
bad
of
thing.
this portion of the book, I think, was her separating good riots from bad riots, because she does think that some riots are wrong if they are in the purpose of like white supremacy or the police or something like that. So that's actually pretty interesting that she uses kind of the first half of the book to kind of talk about that.
Well, I'm not going to mourn white race rioters dying, so I'm with her on that.
All right, but okay, so we're going to move to the fourth question. So this passage says, liberals may oppose the death penalty, but they, like conservatives, believe in the efficacy of murder.
Liberals might believe in the death penalty.
Might oppose the death penalty?
No,
Can you repeat it one more time?
Liberals may oppose the death penalty, but they, like conservatives, believe in the efficacy of murder.
That seems real to me.
Yeah, I'm going to say real.
Well, you guys nailed it on this one. Absolutely. A big part of this book, I think, is arguing against like standard liberalism, like saying that if you're a liberal, you're actually excusing white supremacy, you're excusing defending capitalism. In this case, she goes on to talk about like Obama's drone program. You know, liberals love that, so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, you guys were spot on
Nice.
that.
I got a point on the board.
Absolutely. All right, so number 5. Immigrants' participation in the economy is often based on the exploitation of black communities. To loot their businesses is an act of defiance against the American racial hierarchy.
It could easily be real. I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
I think...
Fake, though.
Okay, well, I'm going to say it's real because I think that actually captures this general line of this belief system really well, actually. From what I do know about, you know, the argument and just the general, like, perspective of people who, like, actually justify looting, I think that's kind of dead on. It's sort of like saying the quiet part out loud in a way, and I don't know. I feel like this book is kind of doing, that's what it's doing, is saying the quiet part out loud. Kind of creating this hierarchy of people and saying, well, you know, usually these people, we consider them victims, but in this scenario, they're higher up than these people, and so they deserve what they're getting now. And so I think I don't know, that seems dead on to me. I'm going to say it's real.
In this scenario, we pity them, and in this other scenario, we revel in their suffering and loss. I could easily see it being, I'm just going to say it's fake just to make it interesting, but I could easily see it being real. And it is basically the same as the rationale that she gave about the Korean immigrants in LA.
So, and this one, you guys are split, so obviously one of you had to be wrong. I actually wrote this one. So this one was satirical, so Leighton wins. But as I wrote it, it was very similar to something she did write in the book. And so she writes this: Black people are thus constantly kept at the bottom of the racial hierarchy, while immigrant participation in American citizenship is predicated on the expropriation of black communities and the reproduction of anti-blackness. So she does argue, actually, that immigrants, by coming to the United States, are expropriating black communities, and they're reproducing anti-blackness. She didn't say it in quite the way I wrote it, but that is basically her argument.
How fantastical is it to suspect that this woman is a fucking FBI plant? It's just so on the nose, right? I mean, it's just like this naked divide and conquer effort, right? There's the immigrant people who fight for immigrant rights need to be, divided from people who fight for the rights of black people. It's just like you couldn't get more patently antisocial in terms of the left's goals.
Sean, how did you figure this one out? You had it right?
No. I think Leighton.
Oh, Leighton had it right. So Leighton, how did you catch that this one was satirical?
I didn't. I was split 50-50. I couldn't tell.
Okay.
So I just
rolled the dice on that one.
I just did it to create some tension in the game.
Sure. All right. So let's see how y'all do on the next one. So number 6, the liberal tendency to disown rioting is a form of whiteness, a denial of the fundamental white supremacist nature of property itself.
Say it again.
Okay, so the liberal tendency to disown rioting is a form of whiteness, a denial of the fundamental white supremacist nature of property itself.
I'll say it.
See, I think this one is just like the perfect balance. So I'm going to say yes, because that idea of property not only being the concept of private property being bad, and also everything bad is white supremacy. I think that's like sort of the sweet spot. So I'm going to go with yes.
Yeah, this is sort of the perfect
real.
Distillation of her argument and the broader ideology, right? Which is like you're just transposing racial categories over old divisions that have been recognized as, class differences or the contradictions of capitalism or whatever. You just take all those old sort of stories of villains and heroes, and you just put black over one and white over the other. That seems like that is like an encapsulation of this ideology. They're not telling new stories; they're just layering race over sort of the old narratives about capitalism.
Yeah. So both of you thought this was real. This was actually false. I wrote this one. It was satirical. However, it is pretty close to something that she argues. She says that, as this book has argued, an attack on the systems of property is an attack ultimately on that axiomatic property whiteness. And this property in whiteness is the only property many poor white people know.
So if we can just pause here, I mean, the fact that, Zed, you're so able to mimic this sort of like argument and this sort of writing, I think is sort of telling about this whole genre of kind of intellectualism, right? Like, I think you can essentially, I mean, what this really is and why we see such a proliferation of this kind of like thinking in books and articles and in just the general discourse is because you can basically do this with anything. You can take critical theory, right? And you can apply it to basically any object in the world, any concept in the world, and you can just problematize everything and apply all the same concepts, right? I mean, it's really just a template. Mm-hmm. And Zed, you're just so well versed, such a scholar in it that I think you're like just completely owning us right now. And I just want to, give you credit for that.
It's just like paint by numbers intellectualism. It's like there's this ideology offers no new ideas. It's just like there's a language there. There's a set of very crude concepts. There's like a toolbox of concepts. And then, Vicky Osterweil's talent seems to be the fact that she's got some capacity to write poetically. And so then, just like, but there's no new thinking in it. It's just like throw this mishmash together.
Yeah, it's like sort of a gold rush, right? It's like an intellectual gold rush in a certain way. I mean, to me, it sort of like mimics like what we saw with like the .com bubble in a way, which is like as soon as everyone figured out you can just do this one thing to all the things in the world, everyone was just rushing to add .com to whatever, right? And so I feel like this is sort of the intellectual equivalent, like, oh, let's, problematize all the things now. Let's, critically theorize all the things and like who can get to the most objects as quickly as possible.
Speaking of that, let's go to the next one because this one I think this one's pretty hard, honestly. So, number 7, but the looting described, defended, and historicized here, that of a crowd of people publicly, openly, and directly taking things in the midst of a riot and social unrest, has no easy synonym. I personally like the phrases proletarian shopping and shopping for free quite a lot, and use the Marxist expropriation too.
You're very good at the fake one, so it makes me uneasy about guessing yes, but my gut instinct is yes. This seems real. Proletarian shopping.
That's just like so creative that, like, you know, Zed, if you're really on your game, I could give you credit for that. But I'm going to have to say that's real.
That's real. You guys are right. She is trying to explain sort of, you know, what are some other terms we can use for looting? Because in her words, looting is kind of a racist term. It comes from an old, like, Hindu word loot, which was used for goods or spoils. Hindi word. Although I, having been someone who speaks Hindi, have never heard of anyone use this word in any way, shape, or form. So apparently its very hidden etymology was very, very, cleverly disguised by racists over the years. But basically she decides to say, hey, people use this term in many different ways, but we can also create our own kind of creative vocabulary around it if we don't want to give in to sort of these older kind of tribal racist origins of the phrase, which is pretty interesting. I mean, proletarian shopping is not bad. Like, if I had to create a new term for proletarian shopping is really not bad. Shopping for free is kind of weird.
Well, proletarian, it's like she's trading in racism for classism. Proletarian shopping, that's like, I mean, this is, again, another item in my my list of exhibits as to Vicky Osterwald being an FBI plant, because proletarian shopping, that's like, basically you're saying that when theft, crime is poor people shopping. This is how poor people live their lives. This is their analog for respectable middle class behavior is theft. The only difference is that she's glorifying it instead of condemning it, but it's the same conception of the reactionary right.
Right. Well, what's interesting about this book, and another part, and I don't quote this in the quiz, so I can say it now. She doesn't seem to have a very high opinion of the middle class at all. Especially the black middle class. So she quotes that the editorial board of Harlem's Amsterdam News led the charge for the black middle class, writing an excoriating denunciation of the looting that was reprinted in papers throughout the country to provide cover for more openly racist anti-looting positions. So she even sees black people who oppose looting as just basically puppets. Like, they're just doing it to give cover for racists who are against looting. Of course, there's a pretty good reason why black people are against looting, because in many historic locations, including Detroit, Los Angeles, Baltimore, St. Louis, where there was rioting and looting, those communities don't recover for years, sometimes decades. I think one of the reasons Detroit hasn't seen any rioting lately is because people there say they remember, like the older people remember what it was like and how bad of an impact it has. So in her view, if you're a poor person or a black person, your kind of natural or default state is to be supportive of this. And if you're not, you're kind of just giving cover to other people, right? Like, you have false consciousness, which, as Leighton was saying, it's that same kind of Marxian view, but it's applied to racial lens here.
And I mean, it should be noted that this essentially puts her on the opposite side of the majority of black Americans, right? Because, I mean, the majority of black Americans are actually middle class. And I'm sure, I'm pretty confident that if you did poll them, they would not be siding with her on this.
Yeah, I mean, Gallup did a poll over in August, and I think something like 12% of black Americans and 8% of white Americans, which is so close it might just be statistical, noise, said that they thought looting and rioting were justified forms of protest. So basically nobody supports it, and if I had to guess, if you did the polling across class lines, it probably wouldn't differ that much either.
This is such a confused sort of nexus of race and class, because I mean, really, she's just she condemns the petty bourgeoisie, right? Regardless of what race they belong to, but this is really a crude Marxist class sort of argument, but then she's like just sort of clumsily laying race over it, because it's not really a racial justice thing. If she's saying the black people who are affiliated with capital, or who are somehow compromised by the corruption of capital, are no longer allies of the poor blacks. And I don't know if she's making a distinction between poor whites looting. Is that just as righteous in her mind? I don't even understand where the race thing, where race really comes into it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean Right. I mean that reminds me of yesterday. This excerpt I came across from this professor at Columbia University. I think his name is Musa Al-Garbi. Is that do you know who I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
he I believe is at Columbia University, right? And he's a sociologist.
Yeah, yeah, and he wrote an essay about this. And I just saw a snippet, and I want to read the whole essay. But the snippet was all about how there's this kind of increasing kind of trend in both in academia, white kind of academia, and also in just the liberal upper class of using race and racism really as a cover for just kind of promoting their own sort of cultural tribal class politics, and so and sort of using the accusation of racism as a way of just kind of furthering what is not really intended to be not really intended to be politics that serves, whoever, people of color, but really more as a way of just kind of serving their own interests. And I think that's exactly what's sort of going on here, right? Leighton, when you're saying that she's sort of layering on this whole kind of race discussion, it's really just a way, it seems to me, it's really just a way of giving some kind of extra added oomph, some moral cover to what's just a political argument that she wants to make, which is, hey, that's fine. If you've got this political argument you want to make against the middle class or people who run small businesses or whatever. I mean, if you're just a person who, as we know, I think she comes from a somewhat privileged background, from parents who are, or a father was an academic himself. And so she's an academic herself. She's an intellectual. She doesn't really come from this class of people that she's
Is she an academic? I know we've
actually,
posited
yeah,
it a
I don't
few
know.
times.
Well,
I don't think she has a PhD.
Right. No, she might not be an academic, but she's an intellectual,
Right.
I guess is what I should say. A scholar, intellectual, a writer, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. She wrote a whole book about, defending Louis, right?
So before we go on, why don't we have 3 questions left.
Okay.
And let's see if we can get through those, and I think we'll summarize it. So number 8, this is question number 8. Property binds our imagination because whiteness binds our imagination.
Yeah, that seems pretty on the nose to me. That seems like the exact arguments he's making.
It does, but Zed's very good at this.
Yeah, I know. That's the problem.
And he has a certain, I don't know, you can speak in others' voices quite effectively. So I'm going to say fake. Let's have a difference of opinion here.
All right, so Shant says real, Leighton says fake. So it's fake. I wrote this for fake. But I think the reason it feels on the nose is because consistently throughout this book, we're told about something called whiteness. One line here is, a revolutionary movement must reduce the value of whiteness to 0, while simultaneously demonstrating the possibility of better lives for all of us stuck under this horrifying system. No small task, but not an impossible one either. It's remarkable to me that this concept of whiteness is thrown out over and over and over. And I imagine, like, if you were to write a book about defending looting, you should probably have a little bit more of a frame of reference than 18th century or 19th century white, American racial science or racial categorization, because there's all kinds of places all over the world, all kinds of cultures. Doesn't seem like looting is just about white people or whiteness or white Americans or the white black American dichotomy. But throughout this book, she talks about that over and over and over, which I think partly is just an attempt by her to take this new discourse that's been created, the critical race theory discourse, and throw it onto the older Marxian class discourse and kind of meld them in a way that doesn't always really make sense.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, in a way, I guess I applaud it that's probably too strong of a word, but it is in a way a rejection of the neoliberal version of this ideology that we've become so accustomed to. At least to her credit, she is taking this hardcore sort of anarchist, anti-capitalist line where she's like, anybody who's complicit with capitalism is the enemy. It's not coherent because it doesn't split along racial lines.
Sure.
But in a way, I don't know, it's maybe I'm more sympathetic to it than the argument that racial justice will be achieved through collaboration with capital by having Tim Cook comparing the death of Jacob Blake to Emmett Till and diversifying corporate boardrooms is the key to racial liberation, economic liberation.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a whole class of kind of political operators who just kind of cynically use this stuff. They don't really believe it, right? I mean, as you said, neoliberals or the corporate class, right, who kind of use this woke critical theory in a really cynical way. And you're right that like if there's one like fun kind of takeaway from this, it's at least to like see them squirm a little, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to the next one. This is the 9th question. We're getting close to the end here. So when Darren Wilson murdered Mike Brown, he was simply following orders given to him by a system that protects property at any cost.
Real.
Yeah,
I think it's
I'm
real.
gonna say real. Yeah.
It's not real. I wrote that one. However, it is very similar to something that she wrote. So she wrote, when Darren Wilson gunned down Mike Brown for the crime of being black in the middle of a street, Wilson's actions represented no great break with American history, no change in the nature of American policing. I thought this was quite remarkable in the sense that she got something blatantly factually wrong, and then she catastrophized it to make her argument. There's an entire kind of chapter called Out of the Flames of Ferguson, and so much of it is predicated on the idea that basically Michael Brown, went around doing basically nothing and was shot because he was black, and then people took revenge by taking, property. Of course, Mike Brown himself took property because he stole something, I believe it was a Quick Trip at a gas station, but he was not shot for that reason, and he wasn't shot for the color of his skin either. Multiple investigations found that shooting was the result of him kind of tackling the police officer, Darren Wilson, being involved in a fight with him, trying to get his gun, so on and so forth. But it's kind of emblematic of the arguments throughout this book in that events are taken and repurposed to serve a kind of political notion. And here, Michael Brown has to serve the narrative, so it doesn't really matter what actually happened with Michael Brown. And I feel like that's why she decided to invoke this. But that's done throughout the book.
Zed, I just want to make sure. Are you sure that Vicky Osterwile is not your pen name?
Let's go to the very last one here. It's number 10. If the riot in Tulsa saw the tragic destruction of a symbol and community of black power, why did many black Tulsans who lived through it look back on it with pride?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. If the riot in Tulsa saw the tragic destruction of a symbol and community of black power, why did many black Tulsans who lived through it look back on it with pride?
I feel like that's real because I feel like that's a preface to an argument that she's making about the destruction of the black bourgeoisie being a good thing.
What do you think, Sean?
I'll say fake.
So this one was actually real. However, the reason that you have cited, Leighton, is not quite why she thinks black Tulsans look back on the Tulsa race riots with pride. She thinks they look back on that because the riot was erupted after kind of a lynch mob was thwarted in its murderous purpose. It was trying to lynch somebody. They were members of what was called the African Blood Brotherhood, ABB, who intercepted and stopped the lynching. After that, there was a bunch of fighting. Basically, her argument is that blacks were kind of proud of this because it was an attempt for them to kind of fight the white power structure. Now, I don't think this is most people's interpretation of the Tulsa race riots. It was seen as a very dark chapter of not only Tulsa's history, but Oklahoma's history and probably American racial history. And I think the reason I picked this quote is because it kind of demonstrates that other people's pain and their struggle and their suffering is seen as very glorious by her. But most people probably don't want to have to form a self-defense group to defend themselves against a lynching, right? Like, it's a terrible thing to have to do. It's a terrifying thing. It's not something they're going to, say, oh, that was great. Those were the great days, But to her, it's like they look back on it with pride, which I've never heard before in any context ever, that anyone was proud of that day. It's like saying someone was proud of living through Pearl Harbor. Not really. It's not their lived experience, quote unquote. But to her it is. So, by the way, Sean, did you keep track of who was winning?
Yeah, Leighton won.
Leighton won. Okay.
Yeah, Leighton won. He's better at smelling your bullshit than I am. Congrats, buddy.
So it looks like Leighton won this round of our kind of game show or our quiz about in defense of looting. Apparently, Leighton is just much better at smelling out the BS that I was writing. However, I think it was pretty hard. Both of y'all missed a number of them, and I think that just speaks to kind of like I said, the rhetorical arms race that's going on with these books. And I think that a lot of what's in this book is just an attempt to be increasingly shocking, to push the envelope, but maybe in a way that ends up losing you a lot of maybe some credibility, because some people just won't find these arguments to make a whole lot of sense. But I do have one last note before we leave the topic of this book and end this episode. There is a very important warning on this book. I will read it for everyone. The Hatchet Book Group supports the right to free expression and the value of copyright. The purpose of copyright is to encourage writers and artists to produce the creative works that enrich our culture. The scanning, uploading, and distribution of this book without permission is theft of the author's intellectual property. If you would like permission to use material from the book other than for review purposes, please contact permissions@hbgusa.com. Thank you for your support of the author's rights. Of course, you could release your book on Creative Commons. You can release it for free. They chose not to do that for this book. I think Vicky values her intellectual property. So if you happen to be listening to this episode, reading her arguments, don't get too carried away with them, because maybe they don't apply to her.
But if you are listening or viewing this episode and you have a lawyer who you trust and you feel so persuaded by Vicky's arguments that this property should be free for all, I don't know, you might consider uploading it to a web page and distributing it for free. I mean, if you're moved by the spirit of her argument,
it would be like an act of civil disobedience.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you examine the etymology of the word upload, I think there's an argument to make that there's nothing wrong with uploading, and also PDF.
Hi, this is Zed. If you like our show, please help us keep it going by becoming a patron at patreon.com/thebackchannel. Thanks.